Life in the American frontier varied dramatically from one settlement to another. Some towns were rough outposts, where sheriffs were scarce, and outlaws could blend in with drifters. But others built reputations for toughness, discipline, and quick justice. These places combined strong law enforcement, active citizens, and reliable communication lines that made it risky for criminals to operate. As a result, certain names on the map signaled danger not for settlers, but for the very outlaws who made the West famous. Number 1. Dodge City. Dodge City grew into a cattle capital almost overnight once the Atchison-Topeka-Santa Fe rails reached the Arkansas River in 1872, turning a buffalo-hide outpost into a seasonal boomtown, where cash, liquor, and tempers spiked with every trail herd. The town's leaders learned fast that prosperity depended on order, so they paired saloon revenue with strict municipal rules, especially around weapons. Contemporary reporting and later scholarship note that early ordinances barred the public carrying of firearms inside town limits and required visitors to check guns with the authorities, a policy common across the frontier's busier hubs. A famous streetscape photo from the late 1870s even shows a billboard on Front Street announcing, "The carrying of firearms strictly prohibited," capturing how civic image and practical safety aligned in a place that billed itself as cowboy capital, but insisted on a controlled Main Street. The enforcement muscle behind those rules mattered as much as the text. Charles Bassett organized county law, Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp served in Dodge at crucial moments, and a deep bench of locally trusted officers backed them, giving outlaws little margin for intimidation or spectacle. Telegraph wires and railroad schedules compressed distance. Word about a stranger's face or a stolen horse traveled quickly, and possess could be fielded or reinforced in hours rather than days. Even notorious flare-ups like the 1883 Dodge City War, a saloon dispute resolved without bloodshed after state pressure and business interests forced compromise, show how political leverage, not just pistols, kept the peace when money and reputation were on the line. The economic machine also structured geography. Residents treated the north side, above the railroad deadline, as the respectable commercial core under tighter rules, while the south side absorbed more vice, a practical partition that narrowed where trouble could start and where it would be tolerated. Saloons, dance halls, and gambling dens were fined and taxed rather than indulged, with the proceeds funding enforcement that in turn safeguarded the very commerce paying those bills. For professional criminals who relied on soft targets and sympathetic bystanders, Dodge City posed the opposite. Vigilant shopkeepers, seasoned lawmen, quick communication, and a civic consensus that rowdy cowboys spending trail wages were welcome, but organized bandits looking for chaos were not. In practice, that mix of ordinance, reputation, and rapid coordination made the town a risky stop for outlaws who preferred places with fewer badges, looser rules, and slower news. Number 2. Tombstone. Tombstone's boomtown economy silver from the Tough Nut, Contention, and Grand Central mines ran best when the streets were predictable, which is why the city council moved early to regulate weapons and crowd control. By April 19, 1881, Ordinance No. 9 barred carrying any deadly weapon in town without a permit, and City Marshal Virgil Earp was charged with enforcement. The rule turned sidearms into contraband within the business district and gave officers a legal lever to disarm known troublemakers the minute they stepped off their horses. That legal framework shaped the famous confrontation on October 26, 1881, when the Earps and Doc Holliday pushed to disarm the Cowboys' men like Ike Clanton and Frank and Tom McClory. What followed was not a spontaneous street duel, but a test of municipal authority against a loosely organized ranching and rustling network that preferred open carry and open threats. The aftermath mattered as much as the 30 seconds of gunfire. A coroner's inquest and the Wells Spicer hearing placed the encounter inside the ordinance's logic, affirming that law in Tombstone flowed from written rules backed by a city government willing to prosecute or exonerate on the record. Information moved fast enough to make intimidation unsustainable. The Tombstone epitaph and rival nugget printed names, depositions, and descriptions that stripped outlaws of anonymity, while telegraph links and tight stage connections to the Southern Pacific at Benson turned pursuit and communication into same-day tasks rather than week-long rides. In practice, the safest criminal play was to stay outside the ordinances' reach-favoring fringe milling towns along the San Pedro, like Charleston and Contention City, where ore processing, saloons, and fewer patrols created cover, but slipping into Tombstone to posture or recruit invited search, seizure, and court dates. Business owners and mine managers reinforced the incentives. Saloons and gambling houses operated on licenses that could be yanked, so proprietors cooperated with disarmament and quietly sided with the badge to keep customers and investors calm after two catastrophic fires in 1881-82. County politics, where messy Sheriff Johnny Behan often clashed with the Earps, but the combined pressure of city ordinances, a newspaper culture that published details quickly, and access to territorial and federal legal channels nudged outcomes toward order. The cowboys learned that visibility inside Tombstone was liability. The town concentrated legal authority, documentation, and public scrutiny in a few blocks where deputies, jurists, and editors worked within shouting distance. Sustained outlaw operations gravitated to roads, ranches, and river towns. Tombstone itself, by design, raised the cost of being bold within its limits. Number 3. Deadwood. Deadwood was born in chaos and illegal settlement carved into Lakota land during the 1876 gold rush, entirely outside the reach of U.S. territorial law at its founding. That lack of legitimate authority drew outlaws, gamblers, and saloon keepers, but it also set the stage for a community that would endure through its fierce, grassroots enforcement of order. What made Deadwood dangerous for professional criminals was not absence of law. That's where they thrived, but the kind of raw, rapid retribution its pioneers developed once they became fed up with unchecked violence. In the early days, men like Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane roamed the streets, their reputations for both law enforcement and lethal resolve well known. Hickok's murder in 1876, while holding the infamous Dead Man's Hand poker cards, triggered an intense reaction. Settlers demanded structure, which quickly led to the establishment of Lawrence County in 1877, and the appointment of lawmen such as Seth Bullock, temporarily, and later John J. Manning as its first elected sheriff. These men weren't flashy legends. They were administrators with grit, who deputized locals and prioritized practical stability over frontier bravado. Bullock clashed with out-of-towners and enforced order without resorting to a single splatter of body on the boards. Manning, for his part, routinely broke up lynch mobs and arrested stagecoach robbers and corrupt officials, using the jail ironically nicknamed the Hotel de Manning to both detain criminals and organize community defense. At the same time, vigilante justice cast a long shadow in Deadwood. Many outlaws learned that in this mining camp, rumor traveled faster than a getaway horse, and mobs formed just as quickly. One notorious outlaw, Lame Johnny, was lynched by anonymous vigilantes while being transported by stagecoach. That kind of fate was enough to caution anyone with a wanted poster to think twice before stepping into town. The law and the mob looked different here, sometimes intertwined, but both acted swiftly and visibly. Adding to the danger, Deadwood's geography and its surroundings contributed to its precarious status. The Black Hills were still considered dangerous by many outlaws' territory, where Native American warriors could appear without warning, and where the rough terrain favored those who knew the land. This sense of isolation discouraged long-term outlaw operations. For criminals, it was easier to work near military or lawless corridors than in a place where survival depended on local intelligence, armed neighbors, and quick decisions. As the railroad arrived in 1890, civilization began to take hold. Towns on the map, official schedules, rail lines, and the encroaching federal presence reshaped the town's character. But by then, Deadwood's reputation as a place where law and vengeance moved in nearly real time had already been cemented in frontier legend. Outlaws avoided it, not because of hoity-toity codes or polished judges, but because they understood that Deadwood's chaos came with a cost, and that cost was often more lethal than any gunfight. Number 4. Abilene. Abilene emerged in 1867 as the West's first cow town, a frenzied railhead at the terminus of the Chisholm Trail, where Joseph McCoy built stockyards, a hotel, and a stable, transforming a quiet way station into a booming livestock hub almost overnight. Season after season, tens of thousands of longhorns passed through, and with them flowed a back current of aggression. Cowboys flush with cash, saloon temptations, and outlaw opportunity. Abilene's leaders understood that chaos threatened the economic lifeline. They needed stability, or the cattle trade would evaporate as quickly as it had arrived. To impose order, they first brought in Tom Bear River Smith, a former boxer whose reputation for handling trouble with his bare hands helped rid the town of guns, at least for a time. His "no guns in town limits" rule may have been unpopular with rowdy cowboys, but it declared Abilene's boundaries not just territorial, but behavioral. Smith survived 2 assassination attempts, but became the first lawman in Abilene's history to force the cowhands to respect authority, until the day he was murdered and decapitated in the line of duty, an execution that shocked the town and underscored the cost of law enforcement in those unsettled times. In the wake of his death, Abilene briefly lapsed, but only until Joseph McCoy persuaded Wild Bill Hickok to take the marshal's badge. Hickok's reputation already mythic by spring. 1871 translated into de facto invincibility, and outlaws understood that he was not a legend to test. One story has John Wesley Hardin, passing under an alias, quietly handing over his guns to Hickok when ordered, recognizing that pushing a star-bearing marshal was a high-stakes gamble. Hickok's decisiveness played out in a confrontation with saloon owner Phil Coe, who fired on him during a brawl. Hickok returned fire, killing Coe, though tragically, an innocent deputy also fell. That deadly incident ended Hickok's brief tenure, but not Abilene's message. The town had demonstrated that even a frontier boomtown could calibrate the right mix of force, ordinance, and character to deter criminal enterprise. The combination mattered. Municipal regulations disarming the reckless, lawmen whose personal authority exceeded the badge, economic incentives aligned around stability, and a civic consensus to protect growth over bloodshed. Outlaws soon learned that Abilene was not a lawless free-for-all, but a community that enforced its value crime carried a price there. As other cowtowns watched, they saw that security meant prosperity, and many sought to emulate Abilene's model, not by trumpeting armament, but by channeling reputation into restraint. Number 5. Denver and Santa Fe. In the decades when small boom camps offered cover for holdups and cattle theft, Denver and Santa Fe stood out as places where infrastructure and institutions tilted the odds against professional criminals. Denver built formal policing early. A municipal force appeared in 1859 and grew with the city, feeding reports to a dense local press that tracked arrests, court calendars, and wanted descriptions day by day. Railroads locked Denver into national timetables in 1870 via the Denver Pacific from Cheyenne and the Kansas Pacific from the east, turning getaways into scheduled events that officers, railroad detectives, and U.S. Marshals could intercept down the line. By the 1880s, Denver was not only a transportation hub, but the state capital, which concentrated courts, records, and officials in a tight radius. Telegraphy amplified this system. Fugitive names and physical details traveled faster than horses. So the safest play for bandits was to operate between railheads, rather than within them. Santa Fe functioned as a different kind of deterrent. An old administrative and trade center tied to the Santa Fe Trail's commercial networks since the 1820s, guarded from 1846 by Fort Marcy on the bluff above town, and embedded in territorial government with judges, clerks, and federal offices nearby. The telegraph reached Santa Fe by 1868, and the Atchison Topeka-Santa Fe Railway linked the city to the national grid in 1880 through the Lamy Spur, a short stretch of track that still collapsed distance for lawmen, even if heavy grades kept mainline rails out of the plaza. These connections meant faster warrants, quicker extraditions, and more collaboration among sheriffs, army detachments, and deputy marshals. They also meant that a robbery inside the city would be telegraphed to surrounding posts before a gang could clear the outskirts. Both cities layered formal power with private enforcement. Banks, express companies, and railroads contracted detectives who circulated photographic circulars and rode trains alongside shipments. So the act of casing a depot or vault raised attention that didn't fade when the sun went down. Urban scale mattered too. Downtown blocks were compact, lighting improved through the 1880s, and nightlife clustered around licensed saloons and hotels that risked losing permits if violence scared off investors. Western towns commonly regulated weapons and disorder in business districts, and larger municipalities enforced those codes with salaried officers and courts capable of processing cases quickly. The combination of ordinances, paperwork, and connectivity punished visibility. Outlaws adjusted accordingly. Stage lines, ranch corridors, and mining camps on the periphery offered looser surveillance and slower communication, while inside Denver and Santa Fe, the presence of a watchful press, telegraph operators, railroad schedules, federal court calendars, and occasional military backing created a web of accountability that made open intimidation an expensive gamble and sustained criminal enterprises nearly impossible. Number 6. The small but fierce towns. Small settlements on the cattle and freight corridors learned early that survival depended on fast, collective responses, and that turned them into bad hunting grounds for organized criminals. The pattern was consistent across the plains and the Southwest. Merchants and stockmen funded night watches. Councils passed weapons ordinances for business streets. Sheriffs swore in temporary deputies at the first hint of trouble, and church bells or steam whistles doubled as alarms that could fill a main street with armed neighbors in minutes. These places lacked the glamour of famous gunfighter capitals, but they compensated with coordination. Ranch communities tied into stock growers' associations and brand inspection networks, which meant a stolen animal could be traced across counties and telegraphed ahead to a depot or trail crossing. Express agents and stage superintendents circulated descriptions of suspects, and the arrival of a wanted face at a small hotel was often met by a clerk already briefed by wire. Outlaws counted on confusion. These towns specialized in recognition. Proximity to forts and ranger detachments mattered as well. In Texas, patrol companies riding out of frontier posts created moving zones of deterrence around nearby hamlets. In New Mexico and Arizona, army garrisons and deputy marshals made it easy for a local sheriff to escalate a case from a saloon brawl to a territorial warrant. Small towns used geography to advantage. Choke points like river crossings, canyon mouths, and rail sidings were watched, and a posse could block egress while riders telegraphed downline to box a gang between stations. Businesses had leverage because licenses, freight contracts, and grazing deals depended on predictable streets. Saloon keepers and hotel owners cooperated with disarmament rules to keep cash customers coming, and they closed ranks quickly when strangers tested boundaries. Violence was not the only tool. Fines, vagrancy arrests, and bond requirements made it costly for drifters to linger, while courts sometimes convened in a schoolhouse-converted community consensus into enforceable paper. Where patience ran out, vigilance committees made examples of horse thieves and stage robbers, and the speed of retribution formed its own deterrent without lengthy campaigns. The result was a counterintuitive map, small dots that looked vulnerable but proved expensive for criminals because everyone knew everyone. News moved faster than a saddle horse, and the legal apparatus, however modest, could scale overnight through deputies, rangers, soldiers, or express detectives. Faced with that mesh of neighbors, notices, and narrow exits, many bands skirted these places entirely and hunted instead along open stretches where a gunshot drew no bell and a name took days to travel.